For section two, the major aspect was the loss of innocence. So as we start the book, we just have Ishmael in his village, and like he's just a regular like 10-year-old boy. However, I mean the war obviously changes him. He loses his family, and then he has to travel literally village to village, like having to forage for resources every day. However, we still see him maintain some of his childhood innocence. We see him still wrestle with his friends, and like even when they're about to arrive at the village that rumorly has all their parents, they are like singing a hymn together on page 90. So there's still some hope and still some childhood innocence. However, as they arrive to the camp and see all the burned bodies on all the bodies of their own family, I think that's the starting point or the shift in Ishmael's turn into a more mature being as he gets really frustrated and he even hits Gesemu before they start to flee. And then eventually the boys get captured, and I think the further turn was just the like military like training to become a soldier. He has to start taking drugs for performance, and I think that obviously doesn't help. It messes up his chemical function, so I think he loses a lot of childhood in that, and that like he's no longer pure. He's taking drugs, and it's just like obviously it's something that like no kid does. And then he also just like keeps holding up his anger. He made new friends in Josiah and Cheku, and they both die in the first battle. And he talks about the anger that he feels, and that's just like not another emotion. A kid feels he's losing more innocence as he goes. And so I feel like that was a major aspect, and I think that made me ask a question. It's like, can a kid who's 10 years old, like still be a kid at the end of the war? Can they like still be clean? And I don't really think so. I think like the war, the ugly part is that everyone's gonna have to see an ugly aspect, and to survive the war, and especially in Ishmael's case, they're gonna have to mature to survive. And we see that because he does do that, and I think that might be a reason why he was able to survive over Josiah and Sheku, and the fact that he was willing to take the shot, and that unlike those boys, his maturity and his anger that he took, even though they aren't childhood aspects, were a reason why he was able to survive. And then I think another aspect that also agree was like present in the first 10 chapters is just still a present disconnect between the soldiers, rebels, and the civilians. So even though we didn't really see much of the soldiers in the first one, we do know that they like flee the town before rebels attacked. Obviously, not too interested in the like benefits of the civilians. So again, like immediately into chapter 11, we see how rebels are disconnected from the civilians. Like they're fighting for the civilians, but they just killed everyone's family. How are they connected? So when that happens on page 97, when they're literally playing a game and smoking marijuana as Ishmael and his friends watch, like how is Ishmael feeling like he's being fought for by the rebels? There's a disconnect, and it's like there's a reason why this war isn't going well for civilians because no one's really fighting for them. And then we see that in the soldiers too. When it gets to page 123, um, the soldiers just came back from a burning village. Like, how are they helping if they're burning down a village? And then Lieutenant Jabati gives a speech about how they're helping the civilians, how they think they're being self-righteous in the fact that they aren't the rebels and that they have a cause to fight for their country and therefore helping the civilians. However, civilians are still dying under their watch. Like there's just like no watch. So I think that just prompted me to ask, is there anyone fighting for the civilians? And I think the only answer would just be the civilians fighting for themselves, if that even counts, because no one's really in the interest of civilians as villages are literally being burnt. Like they just can't live without, like I just there's no way their lives are being supported by the soldiers and rebels if their villages are continuously being burnt. And I think just the fact that like this war is really more for power and like for someone's autonomy but not for everyone's autonomy. And that I think this just shows like the gray of war, and that like there is someone being hurt and marginalized, and there's no one really advocating for them, and that the only way they're going to succeed is like through later in the book we find out Ishmael just fleeing the country outright. And so then, um, a question that I also thought that was a universal theme was that we do see how Ishmael, although he is no longer like in the group of seven, he does make the bonds with Shekum and Josiah, and so that made me ask like, how does companionship help Ishmael. And I think companionship, although the war makes it really difficult to connect someone, companionship allows you to have hope. And I think Ishmael maintained some of itself because like he just lost all his family, but when he sees Josiah and Sheku, it's just another connection that he can have and has himself relate back to like or like ground himself, mental stability, just like the positive effects of having a relationship and is like sane compared to the insanity of a kid having to fight for a war. And I think human companionship goes a lot because like when he was in big groups, I think a reason why the boys are able to survive together is just the fact that they're friends and that like when you're alone it's a lot harder to fight for yourself, but when there's other people fighting with you and for you, they're able to just succeed more. And I think that companionship helped Ishmael because it drove him to do well in the fight and it eventually saved his life because of how well he fought.